Some war films didn't just tell stories, they became survival guides, propaganda weapons, or quietly rebellious works that dared to question the official line. And in the 1940s, Britain produced some of the most gripping war dramas you've probably never seen. Why are these films buried under the weight of bigger epics? And what secrets do they hold about the war years? Stick around, because the answers may surprise you. The Way Ahead, 1944. At first glance, The Way Ahead looks like a straightforward recruiting film, the kind of morale booster the British government wanted during the darkest years of World War II. But look closer, and you'll find something far more layered, a gritty, surprisingly human story about ordinary men turned into soldiers. Directed by Carol Reed, long before he made The Third Man, this film takes you inside the world of shopkeepers, clerks, and mechanics suddenly thrown into the army. The movie follows David Niven as the commanding officer tasked with turning these civilians into a fighting unit. Unlike the polished war heroes in Hollywood productions, these men are clumsy, reluctant, sometimes even ridiculous. They grumble, stumble through drills, and complain about the food. It's messy, funny, and at times painfully real, and that's exactly why it hits so hard. This wasn't just propaganda, it was relatable. It showed the British public that war was fought not by mythic figures, but by their own neighbors. What's fascinating is how the film blends comedy with sharp realism. There's humor in the training sequences, but when the men are shipped off to North Africa, the tone shifts. Suddenly, the chaos of battle reminds you that their clumsy beginnings have deadly stakes. Reed's direction avoids glamorization, keeping the camera close to the soldiers' fears and doubts. The Way Ahead also has a fascinating afterlife. It was widely admired by troops themselves, who saw their struggles mirrored on screen. Decades later, critics still point to it as one of Reed's most authentic works. Yet, it never gained the same fame as In Which We Serve or other wartime hits. Maybe because it was too real, too close to home. Today, it feels like a time capsule of how Britain wanted to both inspire and empathize with its people. And that's exactly why it deserves a revival. Went the Day Well? 1942. Now, here's a film that doesn't pull punches. Went the Day Well? Is a wartime thriller with a premise so shocking that even now it feels unnerving. What if German soldiers disguised themselves as British troops and quietly invaded a rural English village? That's not a Hollywood blockbuster plot. It's Ealing Studios in 1942, right when the outcome of the war was still uncertain. The story starts slow, almost deceptively. The village looks charming, full of quirky characters, church gossip, and small-town banter. But then, the masks come off, and the so-called British soldiers reveal themselves as Nazis. Suddenly, neighbors are forced to fight back in brutal, unexpected ways. Sweet villagers turn into makeshift guerrilla fighters. Women arm themselves. Children risk their lives. The tone goes from cozy to chilling in a matter of minutes. What makes it so powerful is its honesty about violence. People die, messily, unfairly, and sometimes heroically. There's no sugarcoating. This wasn't about reassuring the audience, it was about preparing them. The message was simple. Invasion could happen anywhere, even in your village, and if it does, you'd better be ready to fight. Director Alberto Cavalcanti, a Brazilian working in Britain, brought a dark realism to the film. He doesn't linger on glory. He shows fear, betrayal, and raw courage. The performances from actors like Thora Hird and Leslie Banks feel unpolished, natural, almost documentary-like. That's part of its power. When it came out, the film shocked audiences. Some saw it as too brutal, others hailed it as essential. Today it's recognized as a masterpiece, one of Ealing's boldest productions, and yet, it doesn't get half the recognition of more polished war dramas. Went the Day Well? It wasn't just entertainment, it was a warning. And in its quiet way, it remains one of the most haunting British war films ever made. In Which We Serve, 1942. Some films wear their patriotism on their sleeve. In Which We Serve practically sews it into every frame. Co-directed by Noel Coward and David Lean, it was both a morale booster and a cinematic experiment, one that showed the Royal Navy as Britain's backbone during the war. At its center is the story of HMS Torrin, a fictional destroyer inspired by real ships lost in battle, and the men who served aboard her. What makes this film fascinating is how personal it feels. Instead of focusing only on military strategy, it dives into the lives of ordinary sailors and their families back home. You see wives waiting by radios, children trying to understand where their fathers have gone, and men at sea facing torpedoes and chaos. It was Britain saying to its people, "This war touches everyone, not just those on the front lines." Noel Coward himself stars as Captain Kinross, the stern yet deeply human leader. His performance carries both gravitas and warmth. And it's no surprise the film earned praise on both sides of the Atlantic. Lean's direction, his first big film project, gave the story cinematic depth, weaving flashbacks and ensemble storytelling in ways that were fresh for the time. Was it propaganda? Of course. Churchill's government wanted films like this to rally the public, but propaganda doesn't mean hollow. This one tapped into real fear, pride, and sorrow, and it did it so well that it earned an honorary Oscar in 1943. Yet today, it often gets overshadowed by later war epics with bigger budgets and flashier effects. In Which We Serve isn't just a history lesson, it's a snapshot of national resilience. Watching it now, you can feel the urgency of the time, when every ship and every sailor mattered. It may not scream underrated to historians, but to modern audiences who've forgotten it, this film deserves to be rediscovered. The Silver Fleet, 1943. If you've never heard of The Silver Fleet, you're not alone. This British wartime drama, produced by the Archers, Michael Powell, and Emmerich Pressburger under a pseudonym, tells the story of Dutch resistance against the Nazis. And it's a sharp, daring reminder that wartime cinema wasn't always about flag-waving. Sometimes it was about subtle rebellion. The film follows a Dutch shipyard owner who initially appears to collaborate with the Germans. To his community, he looks like a traitor. But in secret, he's plotting sabotage, using his shipbuilding expertise to undermine the very occupiers who think he's working for them. The tension comes from watching him walk that tightrope, seen as a coward by his people, yet secretly risking everything for them. What sets the Silver Fleet apart is its complexity. It doesn't present characters in neat boxes of hero and villain. The protagonist is disliked by his neighbors, mistrusted by allies, yet his quiet defiance speaks louder than flashy battles. It's a story about the blurred lines of survival under occupation. Powell and Pressburger, known for their bold, colorful films like The Red Shoes, stripped things down here. They hid behind a fictional credit, One of the Archers, because the subject matter was politically sensitive. Even so, the film delivers suspense, moral conflict, and the kind of patriotic undercurrent that Britain needed, without ever feeling simple-minded. Audiences at the time didn't flock to it the way they did with flashier productions, and that's probably why it faded into the background. But in retrospect, it stands as a daring piece of wartime cinema. The Silver Fleet shows us that resistance doesn't always look like soldiers storming beaches. It sometimes looks like one man, quietly and dangerously, fighting back from the inside. San Demetrio, London, 1943. If you think survival at sea films peaked with Hollywood's Lifeboat, think again. San Demetrio, London tells a true story, so gripping it's hard to believe it isn't better remembered. It follows the crew of a British oil tanker attacked and set ablaze by a German U-boat in 1940. Miraculously, the surviving sailors refused to abandon their vessel completely. Instead, they stayed aboard, fought the fires, and navigated the crippled ship back to Britain, carrying its vital fuel cargo. Directed by Charles Friend, this film is lean, suspenseful, and deeply human. There are no grand speeches, no heroic caricatures, just sailors, terrified and exhausted, trying to keep both themselves and their burning ship alive. The cinematography captures the claustrophobic tension of life aboard a damaged vessel, while the performances sell the desperation and grit of men pushed to their limits. What's striking is how anti-glamorous it all feels. The crew aren't larger-than-life heroes. They're working men, battered by war yet unwilling to give up. And because it's based on a true story, the drama feels even sharper. The San Demetrio's survival became a symbol of endurance in the face of impossible odds, and the film captures that spirit without melodrama. When it premiered, it earned respect, but never the same kind of legendary status as other war stories. Maybe it lacked the polish of a Noel Coward production, or maybe its realism was too matter-of-fact to satisfy audiences craving escapism. Either way, it quietly slipped into obscurity. Today, revisiting San Demetrio, London, feels like uncovering a forgotten gem. It's one of the purest depictions of courage under fire, not flashy, not exaggerated, just real. And sometimes that's the kind of war story we need to remember most. 9 Men, 1943. Some war films go big, massive battlefields, sweeping scores, tanks rolling across deserts. 9 Men went the other way. It's stripped down, raw, and almost claustrophobic. Directed by Harry Watt, the film tells the story of a small British patrol pinned down in the Libyan desert during World War II. Just 9. As soldiers, cut off and desperate, holding out against waves of enemy attacks. No grand strategies, no massive set pieces, just survival. The cast wasn't made up of glamorous movie stars. Watt chose mostly unknown actors, many of them non-professionals, to give it a natural, unpolished edge. And it works. These aren't polished screen heroes. They're ordinary blokes cracking jokes, grumbling about food, and then suddenly facing life-or-death combat. That authenticity gives 9 Men its staying power. The desert backdrop is filmed with a stark, almost documentary-like realism. You feel the heat, the thirst, the exhaustion. And when the Germans attack, the gunfights aren't romanticized. They're frantic, chaotic, and ugly. This wasn't a war film designed to make you cheer. It was designed to make you understand the grit of men pushed past their limits. Released in 1943, it was shown to troops as both inspiration and training material, reinforcing the idea that small groups of determined men could hold the line against overwhelming odds. But despite its importance at the time, it never really found lasting fame. Maybe because it didn't have the big names. Maybe because it was too gritty compared to the more polished propaganda films. Today, 9 Men feels like a hidden gem of British war cinema. It's tense, unvarnished, and closer to what soldiers actually lived through than many of the better-known films of the era. If you want to know what desert warfare felt like without the Hollywood gloss, this is the film. The Foreman went to France, 1942. Here's a war drama that feels different from the very first scene. Instead of following soldiers or officers, the Foreman went to France centers on an ordinary factory worker who suddenly finds himself thrust into the chaos of war. Directed by Charles Friend and based on a true story, it follows a British factory foreman who travels to France in 1940, right as the German invasion begins, to secure vital machinery before it can fall into enemy hands. The setup sounds almost absurd. What's one man supposed to do against an entire invading army? But that's the brilliance of the story. It's not about brute force. It's about determination, wit, and sheer courage. The foreman, played by Clifford Evans, isn't a soldier. He's not trained for combat. He's a working man who understands that victory in war depends on more than battles. It depends on keeping the gears of industry turning. The film builds tension as the foreman navigates occupied France, dodging patrols and convincing skeptical locals to help him. Along the way, he becomes an unlikely symbol of British resilience. He doesn't fire a machine gun or storm enemy lines, but his mission matters just as much as any military campaign. What's striking about this film is how it elevates the ordinary. In wartime, Britain it sent a powerful message. You didn't need to wear a uniform to make a difference. Every job, every worker, every act of defiance could tip the balance. The Foreman went to France was well received during its release, but it's rarely remembered today outside of film historians. Yet, in many ways, it captures the spirit of the war effort better than some of the flashier productions. It's about the quiet heroes, the ones who fought not with rifles, but with grit, brains, and bravery. Cottage Toled, 1941. You wouldn't expect a cozy title like Cottage Toled to hide a tense wartime spy thriller, but that's exactly what it is. Directed by Anthony Asquith, this film blends domestic comedy with high-stakes espionage, creating a strange but surprisingly effective mix. At the center is a Scottish inventor working on new weapons for the Allies, who rents out rooms in his countryside cottage. The catch: not all the tenants are who they seem. The story spirals into paranoia when it's revealed that German spies have infiltrated the quiet household, hiding in plain sight among ordinary civilians. Suddenly, what looked like a charming slice-of-life drama turns into a cat-and-mouse game of espionage and betrayal. The performances give the film its edge. Leslie Banks plays the eccentric inventor, while Alistair Sim, best known for his later comedic roles, adds dry humor that offsets the suspense. There's also a young John Mills, years before he became a household name, adding youthful energy to the mix. What makes Cottage Toled so underrated is the way it captures wartime anxieties. The idea that the enemy could be living under your own roof wasn't just a plot twist. It was a genuine fear in Britain at the time. The film taps into that paranoia, making the comedy sharp and the suspense unexpectedly gripping. It may not have the bombast of battle epics, but Cottage Toled shows how the war crept into every corner of civilian life. Spies, secrets, and the feeling that you could never fully trust your neighbors. This was wartime Britain in a nutshell, and the film delivers that atmosphere with both wit and tension. The Demi Paradise, 1943. Now, here's a war drama that dared to do something unusual. It tried to heal political rifts while the world was still burning. The Demi Paradise, directed by Anthony Asquith and starring Laurence Olivier, wasn't about tanks or battles. Instead, it tackled Anglo-Soviet relations, presenting a story of cooperation between Britain and the USSR at a time when the alliance was crucial but uneasy. Olivier plays a Russian engineer who comes to England to help with wartime technology. The film explores his cultural clashes with the British, the suspicions he faces, and eventually, the friendships and respect that grow despite the differences. On the surface, it's a gentle romantic drama with comedic touches, but underneath, it's pure wartime messaging. Britain and Russia may be different, but they must stand together against a common enemy. What makes it underrated is its boldness. In 1943, British audiences were wary of the Soviet Union. The film essentially functioned as propaganda to soften those suspicions and strengthen the image of unity. But instead of hammering the message with speeches, it wrapped it in humor, charm, and a warm performance from Olivier, who gives his Russian character both dignity and depth. Critics at the time praised it for its clever approach, but after the war, the film quickly became awkward. Once the Cold War set in, no one wanted to celebrate Anglo-Soviet cooperation. The Demi Paradise quietly faded from the spotlight, left behind by shifting politics. Today, though, it's fascinating to revisit. It shows not just the war, but the way cinema was used to shape alliances and public opinion. It's witty, oddly hopeful, and an example of how British war dramas weren't just about battles, they were about diplomacy, culture, and the fragile art of getting along. This Happy Breed, 1944. At first glance, you might not even call this Happy Breed a war film. There are no battle scenes, no officers barking orders, no tanks rolling across muddy fields. Instead, it's a story about a British family navigating the everyday struggles between the First World War and the Second. Directed by David Lean and adapted from Noel Coward's play, it focuses on the Gibbons family in suburban London, and that's exactly why it deserves a spot on this list. The film's power lies in its intimacy. We watch this working-class family deal with unemployment, small joys, petty arguments, and the heartbreak of sending sons and daughters into war. There's a deep authenticity in the details: rationing, bomb shelters, the quiet dread of air raids. It doesn't shout about patriotism, it whispers about survival. Robert Newton and Celia Johnson give remarkable performances as Frank and Ethel Gibbons, embodying the resilience of ordinary Britons. And then there's John Mills, again proving why he became one of the era's most recognizable faces. Lean, still in his early directing days, brings a painterly eye to the family's simple home, making even domestic moments feel cinematic. This Happy Breed was popular on release, but over time it slipped through the cracks, overshadowed by Lean's later grand epics like Lawrence of Arabia. That's unfair, because this film captures something many war dramas miss: the way conflict reshapes ordinary families. It's not about glory on the battlefield, it's about the quiet endurance of people who keep living, keep loving, and keep pushing forward even as the world tears itself apart. Rewatching it today feels like opening a window into wartime Britain, not through the eyes of generals or politicians, but through the people who actually bore the weight of history. And that makes it not just underrated, but essential. The Captive Heart, 1946. Released just after the war, The Captive Heart tells a story that feels both deeply personal and universally resonant. Directed by Basil Dearden, it's set in a German prisoner of war camp where British soldiers are trying to survive captivity. But at its center is a twist. Among them is a Czech officer, Captain Karl Hasek, who assumes the identity of a dead British officer in order to escape persecution, only to find himself trapped in the camp alongside the very men he's trying to impersonate. Michael Redgrave gives a moving performance as Hasek, torn between his secret and his growing bond with the British prisoners. Through his letters home, written to a widow he's never met, the film explores themes of identity, loyalty, and the desperate need for connection in a world falling apart. What makes The Captive Heart so remarkable is its balance of suspense and humanity. Yes, there's tension in whether Hasek's secret will be exposed, but there's also tenderness in the way the prisoners cling to small comforts, letters, jokes, shared memories, as they endure captivity. It's a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, humanity finds ways to endure. Critics praised the film on release, and it even scored an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay. Yet, like many of its contemporaries, it faded into relative obscurity as bigger post-war epics stole the spotlight. Which is a shame, because The Captive Heart is one of the most layered British war dramas of its era. It doesn't rely on spectacle, it relies on empathy, and that makes it unforgettable once you've seen it. So there you have it, 12 British war dramas from the 1940s that history left in the shadows. They may not have the explosions of modern blockbusters, but they carry something more powerful: raw honesty, grit, and the pulse of a nation under siege. Which of these hidden gems do you think deserves a comeback? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe for more lost cinema deep dives, and remember, sometimes the films buried deepest reveal the most.